Alright, what's up guys? So today we're going to have a look at the new free plugin from Acustica Audio called Coffee PUn. Coffee PUn is a two-band pultec style EQ that's based on an old Chandler, and it was just released today for free. So I'll have a listen to it on some sources, I'll give you my opinion on what I think about it, and down below in the description you'll find a link to download the plugin. So Acustica Audio is basically a company that creates analog emulations in plugins. They do this by measuring the hardware and then creating their code based off of their measurements of the real unit to create kind of a plugin that behaves in the most similar way possible in the digital domain. So we're going to have a listen to how that sounds in their latest recreation of this plugin called Coffee PUn. Let's jump right into Cubase and we'll test it out. Alright, so here we are, and I've set up a project with a couple loops of different sources. We've got kind of like a drum techno loop here. Here we've got just kind of a drum bongo loop. Here's a guitar loop. We got a snare loop, female vocal, and then here we just have kind of a psytrance kick and bass. So I've set it up with each one of them to have a copy of the new Acustica Audio plugin called Coffee PUn. And we're just gonna first give a little run through of what the plugin sounds like on each one of these sources, and maybe we'll start to see where the plugin is a little bit stronger, or what you like about the plugin, maybe what you don't like about the plugin. So we'll start off with this first loop here, so we'll just listen to it. I'll bypass the plugin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the plugin as it's playing, and as I start to engage the bands, we'll hear the sound change, and then I'll do a bit of boosting and a bit of cutting, and we'll kind of go through how that sounds. Okay, so we can see that we have a boost and a cut band at the same time, kind of in the same range of frequencies. We have the low band and the high band in this particular EQ. So it works in the same way that a pultec does, where you have a boost and a cut, meaning you boost and it starts not around this frequency, but a much higher frequency than that, kind of in like a shelf. And then you can further shape that by putting a cut at a different frequency. So these two bands kind of interact with each other and you get a kind of push and pull, which is very classic to the sound of this type of EQ, being the pultec style EQ. And then in your high band, typically you would have this in a pultec style EQ, you'd have also the boost and the cut. But in this one, you just kind of have what seems to be either a high shelf or a high bell, starting from around 3.9K up to 20K. But again, I'm going to assume, we'll take a look at this later, but usually the pultec frequencies are very broad, and it's not a very precise EQ, it's for very broad shaping. So now that we know kind of how that works, we'll just quickly listen to it on the other sources. So we can see that it's got really silky top end. I happen to like the top end a lot more than I tend to like the bottom bands on pultecs. And in this one in particular, the high end is really nice. I tend to be reaching for it a lot and kind of adding a lot, but it still never really sounds harsh. Another thing I like about this plugin and majority of Acustica audio plugins is that when you actually flick the frequency, you can really hear exactly what's happening and exactly where the kind of frequency is moving or what change is happening. In a lot of EQs, it's not exactly evident that there's a big jump in what frequency you're selecting, but I find it very clear in these EQs what's happening as far as a change being made. So the second thing we're going to talk about is the input level of your audio for Acustica audio plugins. So optimizing your input level will give you better results with your plugins because, without getting too technical, they've calibrated or measured their hardware when they made these plugins at a certain input level. So they'll respond better if you feed them the same input level. So just to be safe, whether it's necessary or not with all of their plugins, we're going to go with -18 dB FS. So I've already leveled those ones before I showed you the example, and we have just this last one here that we're going to have to kind of adjust the level of the clip so that we're hitting -18 dB FS. So -18 dB FS is also the same as 0 VU on a VU meter. So I've just got a Waves VU meter here on the master output, and we're going to adjust the clip gain until we're hitting until we're hitting 0 VU on the meter, and then we'll know we have the correct input level for our Acustica Audio plugin. So there we're hitting just under 0 VU, so we know we have enough headroom, so our plugin will respond better like that. So the next thing that we'll do is we'll kind of just give a quick comparison. We have the other pultec EQ by Acustica Audio, and we're going to set the parameters to the same thing, and we'll just give a comparison. So I'm going to default this back completely. So they're actually slightly off, right? So we'll go with 30 and 35. We'll go with 2 dBs of boost and 1 dB of attenuation. We'll do it at 150 and we'll see if they sound similar. So here's a loop with nothing, and then I'll start by turning on Coffee, and then we'll turn on Basstard or Basstard. So let's listen to it. So it definitely seems that this one seems to give a little bit more gain, although it's at different frequencies. It just seems to give a little bit more something. We don't have a high band to compare, and we also don't have the option to select what frequency the attenuation or the cut is at. So it's not really the same EQ also, but it is going to be compared to each other a lot. So I just wanted to give that quick kind of A/B on the two. So I'll just run through it quickly on the last 2 signals, and then we'll have a look at the plugin in Plugin Doctor, and we'll actually see what the plugin does, how it behaves.
In tears, I'm waiting all night, all day. When I'm falling down, I hear the thunder, thunder, yeah, yeah. In tears, I'm waiting all night, all day. When I'm falling down, I hear the thunder, thunder, yeah, yeah. In tears, I'm waiting all night, all day. When I'm falling down, I hear the thunder, thunder, yeah, yeah. In tears, I'm waiting all night, all day. When I'm falling down, I hear the thunder.
So it's a really great free plugin all in all. Also, what are you going to do? Complain for a free plugin that's from a top quality company? So you can get really great results. Obviously, it depends how you use it. Let's have a look at it in Plugin Doctor, and we'll see exactly how it works. So here we have it open in Plugin Doctor, and what Plugin Doctor does is pretty much give us a look at what the shape of the bands actually are doing. It'll give you a bunch of different things like harmonic analysis. It'll tell us what the plugin, if the plugin actually adds any color to the sound. So it's a really cool plugin to kind of see behind the scenes of what how your EQs work or your plugins affect your signal. So right away, if I start to engage band, we'll see how it changes. So we see already we have some kind of low pass, which doesn't change. It's only once the band is engaged. So if we start to boost, we're at 35 here. But this is very common with pultec EQs, and it's going to be the same with this one. Just because it says 35 does not mean that that's where it starts. So it's going to start much, much higher, and it's going to be like a smooth shelf. So we said 35, right? Which is probably somewhere around here. But yet the boost is starting, let's say, okay, so a little bit here, but it's probably just shifting the Q. But let's say comfortably at least by 1K. So when we shift it up to 50 and 70, we can see how the shape changes, and it affects the curve here. But we can see that it's really, really not precise just because it says 35. It's a really, really smooth shelf. So it's a really broad EQ. Doesn't mean it's a bad EQ or that it's not doing anything. You just have to be aware of that when you make your decisions that you're trying to decide. So secondly, we'll take a look at this high band here, and when you don't use the low band, what the high band is doing. And secondly, when you use both bands together, we'll see kind of how they affect each other. So let's just start with the high band here. Pretty simple shelf, but again, 6K, starting much, much lower, all the way down to, you know, 500. We already have some kind of gain here. As it changes, you can see that the curve kind of just gets a little bit more steep. Besides that, nothing changes too much. Let's go to shelf versus bell. So if we go to bell, we can see that it just basically drops down. There's a center frequency and then it kind of drops down. Versus if we go to shelf, it carries off until that little cutoff of the extreme highs that we saw when we're engaging any of the bands. So secondly, if we start to use it together, we can see how this is totally changing the sound, completely reshaping everything, right? So it's a very broad reshaping thing. I wouldn't use this on anything that you already have tuned very, very close to how you want it to sound. But all in all, it's an excellent plugin. It sounds really, really good. We can see that the preamp kind of engages some filtering. Besides that, we can see that the preamp is adding some harmonics here. So I don't know why the plugin's doing that, but we can see they're not static. It's adding some harmonics for sure. Versus if we turn it off, it's very static. There's nothing else. So we can see that it's definitely doing something, if you will, to emulate the analog sound, as well as obviously the curves having a very analog behavior where they interact with each other. So in the description, there's going to be the link to download it. I hope you guys liked my first plugin walkthrough kind of review video. If you did, drop me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.